A millionaire saw a woman. Wandering his office complex, what he discovered changed everything. Have you ever looked at someone and thought you knew their entire story in a single glance? We all do it. We see a person in a space where they don't quite fit, and our minds fill in the blanks before we even say hello. This is a story about assumptions. About the walls we build, not just with glass and steel, but with judgment. It's about a man who had everything money could buy, except the one thing that mattered most: the ability to truly see people. What happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in a sleek corporate office would challenge everything he thought he knew about belonging, dignity, and what it really means to look at another human being. This isn't a story about heroes or villains. It's about something far more uncomfortable. The moment we realize we've been wrong all along. Michael Harrison was 42 years old and had been walking through the same glass corridor every day for 7 years. Chief Executive Officer of Harrison Technologies, a software company he'd built from a garage startup into a 9-figure enterprise. The building reflected his success: all minimalist architecture, transparent walls, and spaces designed to inspire innovation. But Michael wasn't thinking about inspiration that Tuesday. He was thinking about the quarterly earnings call, the potential merger with a competitor, and whether his assistant had remembered to reschedule his dentist appointment. His phone buzzed in his hand, another email demanding immediate attention. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished marble floor as he walked, his navy suit perfectly tailored, his mind already 3 meetings ahead. And then he stopped, not because of anything dramatic, not because someone called his name or because an alarm went off. He stopped because something in his peripheral vision didn't fit the pattern he'd come to expect. There, near the glass wall overlooking the atrium, stood a woman. She was African American, probably in her early 30s, wearing dark jeans, a white blouse, and a gray cardigan. Her hair was natural, pulled back into a neat, low bun. She held a modest tan handbag close to her body, not clutched in panic, just held, naturally. She wasn't doing anything unusual. She wasn't running. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't rifling through bags or acting suspicious. She was simply there. And that was the problem. Michael's building operated on an invisible code. Everyone who belonged here moved with purpose. They carried laptop bags or wore ID badges on lanyards. They walked quickly, spoke into Bluetooth earpieces, carried coffee cups with their names misspelled on the side. This woman was still. He watched her for a moment, trying to categorize her. Was she lost? Was she waiting for someone? Was she and he hated that this thought crossed his mind first supposed to be here? She turned slightly, her eyes scanning the directory mounted on the wall. Her expression was calm, almost peaceful. She didn't look confused. She didn't look desperate. She looked like someone who had every right to be exactly where she was. And that unsettled him more than if she'd been frantically asking for directions. Michael felt his jaw tighten. He wasn't sure why he cared. He had places to be, important places. This wasn't his problem. But he didn't move. The woman glanced at her watch, not a smartwatch, he noticed, but a simple, silver, analog watch. Then she looked up at the high ceiling, at the geometric patterns of the skylights, as if she were appreciating the architecture. Who appreciates architecture in a moment like this? He thought. A man in a gray security uniform appeared at the far end of the corridor. Carl. Michael had seen him around, but never learned much about him beyond his first name. Carl slowed his pace when he noticed the woman, his hand instinctively moving to the radio clipped to his belt. But he didn't approach her. Not yet. Michael felt an uncomfortable knot forming in his stomach. He realized, with sudden clarity, that he was waiting for something to happen, waiting for her to be confronted, questioned, escorted out. And he didn't know how he felt about that. The woman shifted her weight slightly, adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder. She wasn't fidgeting. She wasn't nervous. She was just waiting. Michael looked down at his phone, pretending to read an email. But he wasn't reading anything. He was thinking. When had he become the kind of person who assumed someone didn't belong simply because they weren't moving fast enough? When had stillness become suspicious? He thought about his own life, the way he moved through airports with elite status, through restaurants with reservations, through buildings with key cards that opened every door. He belonged everywhere he went because the world had been designed to make space for people like him. Had he ever stopped to wonder what it felt like for people the world didn't automatically make space for? The woman turned, and for a brief moment, their eyes met through the glass partition. She didn't look away. She didn't smile nervously or drop her gaze. She simply acknowledged his presence the way one human being acknowledges another. And then she turned back to the directory. Michael felt his face grow warm. Had she noticed him staring? Of course she had. And she'd done nothing wrong, which made his scrutiny feel even more intrusive. He forced himself to move, continuing down the corridor toward the executive elevator. But with each step, he felt the weight of something he couldn't name. Guilt? No, not quite. Awareness. The uncomfortable awareness that he had spent the last 5 minutes of his life doing exactly what he claimed to be above, judging someone based on appearances. The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside and pressed the button for the 14th floor. As the doors began to close, he looked back. She was still there, still calm, still waiting, and he still had no idea why it bothered him so much. Michael's office was a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. On clear days, he could see all the way to the harbor. Today, gray clouds pressed against the glass, turning the world outside into a watercolor blur. He sat at his desk, laptop open, but he wasn't working. He was thinking about the woman. It had been 20 minutes since he'd seen her in the corridor, and he couldn't shake the image from his mind. The way she'd stood there, so self-possessed, the way she'd looked at him not with fear or deference, but with simple human acknowledgement. He tried to focus on the spreadsheet in front of him, but the numbers blurred together. Who was she? He told himself it didn't matter. People came and went from this building all the time. Delivery personnel, job applicants, visitors for other companies that shared the complex. But something about her presence felt different. Michael leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He thought about Rebecca. Rebecca had been his girlfriend 3 years ago. Beautiful, charming, always perfectly dressed for whatever event they were attending. She'd loved being seen with him at gallery openings, charity galas, investor dinners. He remembered the night he'd realized she didn't actually love him. They'd been at his apartment. A rare, quiet evening with no social obligations. He'd suggested they order takeout and watch a movie, something simple. She'd looked at him with barely concealed disappointment and said, "That's it? That's what you want to do?" It wasn't that she was cruel. It was that she'd never been interested in the person behind the portfolio. She loved what he represented: access, status, proximity to power. When he'd ended things, she'd been more upset about losing her +1 to exclusive events than losing him. Michael opened his eyes and stared at the gray sky. Was he any different from Rebecca? The thought made him uncomfortable. He'd built his entire life around exclusivity. The right schools, the right investors, the right office building. Everything was curated, filtered, controlled. And somehow, without realizing it, he'd started seeing people the same way he saw business opportunities, worth engaging with or not worth his time. His phone rang. He glanced at the screen, his CFO, Jennifer. "Michael, do you have a minute? We need to talk about the Cascade acquisition." He pressed the speaker button. "Go ahead." As Jennifer dove into the details of the deal valuations, due diligence concerns, integration timelines, Michael found his attention drifting to the window. From his office, he couldn't see the ground floor where the woman had been standing, but he imagined she was still there, still waiting, still calm. "Michael, are you there?" He blinked. "Yeah, sorry. Continua." Jennifer paused. "Are you okay? You seem distracted." "I'm fine. Just thinking." "Well, think about this. If we don't move on Cascade by Friday, someone else will. Always moving. Always urgent. Always the next thing." When had he last stopped to simply be present? "Let's schedule a full team meeting tomorrow," he said. "I need to think this through." Jennifer sounded surprised. Michael Harrison didn't usually need time to think. He made decisions quickly, confidently, efficiently. After the call ended, Michael stood and walked to the window. The city stretched out before him, thousands of buildings filled with millions of people, each with their own stories, their own reasons for being wherever they were. He thought about the woman again. Maybe she was meeting someone. Maybe she was early for an interview. Maybe she was a consultant for one of the other companies in the building. Or maybe, and this thought struck him with unexpected force, maybe it was none of his business, and the fact that he felt entitled to know said more about him than about her. At 2:47 p.m., Michael left his office to attend a meeting 3 floors down. He told himself he was taking the stairs instead of the elevator because he needed the exercise. He told himself he wasn't looking for her. But when he reached the ground floor and walked through the atrium, his eyes scanned the space automatically. And there she was. She'd moved since the morning. Now she sat on one of the modern benches near the water feature, a minimalist fountain that burbled quietly in the center of the atrium. Her handbag rested beside her, and she held a book in her hands. A book. Michael slowed his pace, trying not to stare but unable to look away. Who brings a book to an office building lobby? She was reading intently, occasionally turning a page with careful attention. Her posture was relaxed but dignified. She wasn't sprawled across the bench or taking up excessive space. She was simply reading, as if this were a library, or a park, or her own living room. The audacity of her comfort fascinated him. Carl, the security guard, stood near the main entrance. He was watching her too, Michael noticed, but still, he hadn't approached her. Michael wondered what the protocol was. How long did someone have to be in the building before security intervened? What were the rules? And then he realized there probably weren't clear rules. Because people like her, people who didn't fit the visual template of belonging, were rare enough that their presence alone felt like a violation of some unspoken code. The thought made him deeply uncomfortable. A woman in a sharp pantsuit walked past, her heels clicking authoritatively. She glanced at the woman on the bench, and Michael saw at the quick assessment, the momentary confusion, the subtle quickening of her pace. The woman with the book noticed none of this. Or if she did, she gave no indication. She simply turned another page. Michael checked his watch. He was going to be late for his meeting. But he didn't move. He thought about walking over, introducing himself, asking if she needed help. But what would he say? "Excuse me, I noticed you've been here for several hours. Are you lost?" Even in his mind, it sounded patronizing. "Hi, I'm Michael Harrison. I own this building. Can I ask what you're doing here?" Worse, entitled and invasive. The truth was, he had no right to question her. She wasn't causing a disturbance. She wasn't breaking any laws. She was sitting on a bench in a semi-public space, reading a book. And yet, her presence felt like a question mark in the carefully ordered world he'd created. Michael forced himself to turn away and head to his meeting. But as he walked, he couldn't shake the image. A woman, alone, reading in a building full of people too busy to sit still for even a moment. She looked more at peace than anyone he'd seen in months, including himself. The meeting ran long, as they always did. By the time Michael emerged, it was after 4 p.m. He should have gone back to his office. He had emails to answer, calls to return, decisions to make. Instead, he found himself walking back through the atrium. She was gone. The bench where she'd been sitting was empty, the space looking suddenly too big without her presence. Michael felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. He walked to the elevator bank, pressing the button for the 14th floor. As he waited, he noticed Carl approaching from across the lobby. "Mr. Harrison." Carl nodded respectfully. "Carl," Michael hesitated, then asked, "That woman who was here earlier, on the bench, did she leave?" Carl's expression became carefully neutral. "She's still in the building, sir. Last I saw, she was on the 3rd floor near the west corridor." "Has she said anything? Explained why she's here?" "No, sir. And she hasn't asked for help or caused any problems. I've been monitoring the situation, but—" Carl trailed off. "But what? But she hasn't done anything that would require me to intervene. She's not trespassing. The building's ground floor is technically accessible to the public during business hours. And she's been respectful." Michael nodded slowly. "Thank you, Carl." The elevator doors opened, but Michael didn't get in. He walked toward the west stairwell instead. He wasn't sure what he was doing. He wasn't sure what he'd say if he found her. But something was pulling him forward, some need to understand that he couldn't quite name. The 3rd floor housed several smaller companies, a marketing firm, a law practice, a financial advisory group. The corridor was quieter than the ground floor, lined with frosted glass doors and muted gray carpet. And there she was, standing near a window at the end of the hall, looking out at the city below. Michael's footsteps were soft, but she must have heard them because she turned slightly, acknowledging his presence without alarm. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Beautiful view," she said finally, her voice warm and measured. Michael walked closer, stopping a respectful distance away. "Yes, it is. I've never seen the city from this angle before," she continued, turning back to the window. "It's different up here, quieter." He studied her profile. Up close, he could see the fine details he'd missed before. The small silver earrings, the laugh lines around her eyes, the way her hands rested calmly at her sides. "Are you—" he started, then stopped, uncertain how to phrase the question without sounding accusatory. She looked at him, one eyebrow slightly raised, waiting. "Are you waiting for someone?" he finally asked. "In a way," she said. The answer was so simple, yet it told him nothing. "I'm Michael," he offered, extending his hand. "Michael Harrison." She shook his hand with a firm, confident grip. "Debbie, Debbie," he repeated. "Do you work here?" "No." The silence stretched between them. She didn't elaborate. She didn't seem uncomfortable with the silence. Michael felt his usual confidence faltering. He was accustomed to conversations where he controlled the pace, where people deferred to him, where his position filled in all the gaps. With Debbie, there were no gaps to fill. She was complete unto herself. "I don't mean to pry," he said carefully. "I just noticed you've been here for a while, and I wanted to make sure you were okay, that you didn't need help." Debbie's expression softened slightly, but there was something knowing in her eyes. "That's kind of you, but I'm exactly where I need to be, which is here for now." Michael felt frustration rising, not at her, but at his own inability to understand. I'm sorry. I don't mean to question you. It's just unusual for someone to spend this much time in the building without a reason you can understand?" Debbie finished gently. He stopped, caught off guard by her directness. "I have a reason," she continued. "A very good one, but it's mine, and I don't owe it to anyone." The words weren't hostile. They weren't defensive. They were simply true. And they hit Michael like cold water. She was right. She didn't owe him an explanation. She didn't owe anyone an explanation. "You're right," he said quietly. "I apologize." Debbie studied him for a moment, as if reassessing. "You seem like someone who doesn't apologize often." "I don't have to very often. That's not the same thing as being right very often." Despite himself, Michael smiled. "No, I suppose it's not." The elevator dinged at the end of the hall, and a group of people emerged, their laughter filling the corridor. They passed Michael and Debbie, their conversation pausing briefly as they registered the two strangers standing by the window, then resuming as they disappeared around the corner. "I should go," Debbie said, adjusting her bag. "Of course, I didn't mean to keep you." She walked past him toward the elevator, then paused and turned back. "Mr. Harrison," she said, "do you ever just sit and watch the world without trying to organize it?" The question caught him completely off guard. I'm not sure I know how." Debbie nodded, as if this confirmed something she already suspected. "That's the saddest thing I've heard all day." And then she stepped into the elevator, the doors closing before he could respond. Michael stood alone in the corridor, her words echoing in his mind. He looked out the window at the city below, the traffic, the people, the endless movement. When was the last time he'd simply watched, simply existed without agenda? He couldn't remember. Michael didn't go back to his office. Instead, he found himself in the building's small coffee shop on the ground floor, something he rarely did. Usually, his assistant brought coffee to him. He ordered an Americano and sat by the window, watching people come and go. Debbie had unsettled something in him, shaken loose, a question he'd been avoiding for years. What was he actually doing with his life? He'd built a successful company. He had wealth, influence, respect in his industry. He sat on boards, advised startups, gave interviews about leadership and innovation. But when was the last time he'd felt genuinely connected to another person? When was the last time someone had challenged him, not as a CEO, but as a human being? His phone buzzed, another email, another decision required. He ignored it. Through the coffee shop window, he saw Debbie emerge from the elevator bank. She walked slowly through the atrium, not heading for the exit, but towards something specific. The memorial wall. Michael sat up straighter. He'd forgotten about the memorial wall. It had been installed 3 years ago after the building's renovation. It was a simple glass panel, etched with names, employees, and tenants who had passed away. A small gesture of remembrance that the building management had commissioned. Debbie stood before it, her hand reaching out to touch one of the names. And in that instant, everything shifted. Michael set down his coffee and walked out of the cafe, crossing the atrium with purpose but without hurry. He stopped a few feet away from Debbie, reading the names on the wall. There were perhaps 30 names total, arranged chronologically. His eyes scanned them until he found the one her fingers were touching. David Bryant, 1985 to 2023 Harrison Technologies, software engineer. Michael's breath caught. David Bryant. He remembered him. A brilliant engineer, one of the early employees at Harrison Technologies. Quiet, dedicated, always the last one to leave the office. He died suddenly, a heart attack, at 38. Michael had gone to the funeral, sent flowers, written a check to David's widow, but he hadn't really known him. Not beyond performance reviews and quarterly check-ins. "You knew David," Michael said softly. Debbie turned, surprise flickering across her face when she saw him. "He was my brother," she said. The words landed with weight. "Your brother," Michael repeated, feeling something crack inside his chest. "Half-brother, technically. Different fathers. But he was the person who understood me best in the world." She turned back to the memorial. "Today is his birthday. He would have been 40. Michael couldn't speak. His mind was racing, recalculating every assumption he'd made. "I came here because it's the last place he was truly happy," Debbie continued. "He loved working here, loved the problems he got to solve, the team he worked with. He used to tell me about the projects, about the challenges. He said the building felt like possibility, all this glass and light, like the future was something you could see clearly." She smiled, but there were tears in her eyes now. "I couldn't make it to his grave today. I have 2 jobs, and I couldn't get the time off. But I wanted to be somewhere he loved. So I came here, just to sit, just to feel close to him." Michael felt like he'd been punched. "Debbie, I know who you are, Mr. Harrison. David talked about you. He respected you. He said you pushed him to be better, to think bigger." "He was extraordinary," Michael said, and meant it. "I should have told him that more often. We all should have told people more things," Debbie said quietly. They stood together in silence, looking at the name etched in glass. "I've been here since 9 a.m., Debbie said. "I sat in the lobby, read a book David gave me for my birthday 2 years ago, walked the floors where he used to work, tried to see the world the way he saw it." She wiped a tear from her cheek. "I didn't mean to cause any concern. I just needed to be here." "You didn't cause concern," Michael lied, then corrected himself. "No, that's not true. I did notice you. I did wonder why you were here. And I'm ashamed to say that my first instinct wasn't curiosity about your story. It was something else." Debbie looked at him directly. "You wondered if I belonged." "Yes," she nodded, not with anger but with tired recognition. "People wonder that a lot." "That's not an excuse for me," Michael said. "I spent the whole day watching you, questioning you, when you had every right to be here. More right than almost anyone, really." "David would have found this funny," Debbie said with a sad smile. "His boss interrogating his sister for the crime of sitting quietly in a building." Michael winced. "I wish I'd known him better. Really known him." Most people didn't. David was quiet. He didn't demand attention. But he was brilliant and kind, and saw the best in everyone. She looked back at the memorial. The world lost something important when he died. "Yes," Michael agreed. "It did." They stood together a while longer, 2 strangers connected by loss and revelation. Finally, Debbie picked up her bag. "I should go. I have a shift at 7. 2 jobs, Michael said, remembering what she'd mentioned. 3, actually. But one's just weekend mornings. He thought about the modest clothes, the worn handbag, the fact that she couldn't take a day off for her brother's birthday. He thought about David, working late nights, never complaining, never asking for more. He thought about how blind he'd been. "Debbie, would you let me—" "No," she interrupted gently. "Whatever you're about to offer, the answer is no. David wouldn't want that. He'd want me to stand on my own. That's what he taught me. At least let me call you a car." She smiled. "I can take the bus, Mr. Harrison. I've been taking the bus for 30 years. Please, it's the least I can do." Debbie studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, thank you." While they waited for the car, Debbie and Michael sat on the bench where she'd been reading earlier. "What was the book?" Michael asked, gesturing to the paperback in her bag. Debbie pulled it out, a worn copy of James Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain. "David gave me this. He said Baldwin understood loneliness and belonging better than anyone." Michael nodded. "I've never read it." "You should," David left notes in the margins. She opened to a random page, showing Michael the small, neat handwriting. See? He was always thinking, always questioning. Michael looked at the notes' observations about faith, family, identity. The handwriting was so alive, so present. "May I ask you something?" Debbie said. "Of course. Why did you follow me today?" "Really?" Michael considered the question carefully. "Honestly? At first, I think it was control. I'm used to knowing everything that happens in this building. You were an unknown variable. And later, it became something else. You challenged me without saying a word. You were so calm, so certain of yourself, and it made me realize how uncertain I am of everything that's supposed to matter." Debbie listened without judgment. "I've spent my whole life building and acquiring and organizing," Michael continued. "But I'm not sure I've actually lived. Not the way David did. Not the way you do." "You don't know how I live," Debbie said gently. "You're right. But I saw you today. Really saw you, eventually. And what I saw was someone who knew how to be present, who knew how to honor what matters. That's rarer than you might think." "David used to say that rich people had forgotten how to sit still," Debbie said with a small smile. "He said you all were so busy collecting experiences that you forgot to actually experience anything." Michael laughed, a genuine sound that surprised them both. He was absolutely right. The notification came through that the car had arrived. As they walked to the entrance, Debbie paused. "Thank you for talking with me, Mr. Harrison. I know you're busy." "I wasn't," Michael said. "Not with anything that mattered." "You should change that." "I'm starting to think so." At the car, Debbie turned back one more time. "You know what David said about you?" "What?" "He said you had good instincts, but bad habits. He said you cared about the right things. You just forgot to act like it sometimes." Michael felt the words settle into him like stones into water. He was a perceptive man. "He was my brother," Debbie said, as if that explained everything. And maybe it did. She got into the car, and Michael watched it pull away into the evening traffic. He stood there long after the car disappeared, the city moving around him in its endless rhythm. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about what came next. He was thinking about what he'd missed. Michael didn't go back to his office that night. He texted his assistant that he was leaving early, something he couldn't remember doing in years. Instead, he walked through the building slowly, seeing it differently now. The glass walls that had always represented transparency now seemed like barriers, beautiful but cold. The efficient flow of people suddenly looked like avoidance, everyone moving too fast to actually connect. The name on the memorial wall, David Bryant, and the 29 others. How many of them had he actually known? How many lives had intersected with his own that he'd never bothered to understand? He thought about Debbie, taking 3 jobs to survive, still finding time to honor her brother on his birthday, still finding time to read, to be still, to remember. He thought about David, working late in this building, seeing possibility in glass and light, while Michael had seen only profit margins. In his corner office, Michael sat down at his desk and opened his laptop. But instead of checking emails, he searched for something he'd never looked for before. He found David Bryant's employee file, performance reviews all excellent. Salary history, he'd been underpaid, Michael realized with a sick feeling. Letters of recommendation David had written for interns. A photo from a team-building event where David was smiling, standing slightly apart from the group. Michael had been in that photo, he realized, but he couldn't remember anything about that day. He opened his calendar and looked at the next 3 months. Meetings, conferences, calls, every hour accounted for, and not a single moment for living. He thought about what Debbie had asked him. Do you ever just sit and watch the world without trying to organize it? Slowly, carefully, Michael began to make changes. He blocked out 1 hour every day, marked only as personal. He scheduled a meeting with HR to review employee satisfaction and compensation across the company. He sent a message to his executive team. Moving forward, I want us to implement Know Your Team sessions, one-on-one conversations with every employee, not about performance, but about who they are. It wasn't much. It was barely a beginning, but it was something. 3 weeks later, Michael was standing in the same corridor where he'd first noticed Debbie. The glass walls still gleamed. The building still hummed with activity, but he saw it differently now. He saw the security guard, Carl, and made a point to ask about his daughter's graduation. He saw the woman who cleaned the offices at night and learned her name was Rosa, and that she sent money back home to Guatemala every month. He saw the intern who always arrived early and stayed late, and recognized himself 20 years ago, hungry, brilliant, and invisible. He saw people, and he tried, every day, to really see them. On David Bryant's memorial date, Michael had a small ceremony organized. He invited Debbie, and she came. Together, along with David's former teammates, they shared stories about the quiet engineer who had seen possibility in everything. Debbie stood beside Michael, looking at her brother's name etched in glass. "He'd be proud of you," she said quietly. "Not for being successful, for being willing to change." "I'm still learning," Michael admitted. "We all are." As the small gathering dispersed, Michael stayed behind. He placed his hand on the glass, feeling the cool surface beneath his palm. Seeing is easy, he thought. Understanding takes courage. Through the glass, he could see his reflection, no longer just a CEO, no longer just a title, just a man trying to do better, trying to see. Sometimes, the stories that change us aren't loud. They don't come with dramatic revelations or sudden transformations. Sometimes they come in the quiet moments, in the questions we're too uncomfortable to ask, in the judgments we make without thinking, in the courage it takes to admit we've been wrong. Michael Harrison learned that day that dignity doesn't announce itself. It simply exists, and that the difference between looking and seeing isn't about what's in front of us. It's about what we're willing to recognize in ourselves. Debbie taught him that without saying much at all. She taught him by simply being present, by refusing to apologize for existing in a space that wasn't sure it wanted her. And in doing so, she cracked open something in him that had been closed for far too long. The glass building still stands, still gleams, still houses hundreds of people pursuing success. But now, at least in one corner office, someone is learning that success without humanity is just an expensive way to be alone. And that's worth more than any quarterly earnings report could ever measure. What assumptions have you made today about someone you passed on the street? Someone in your office? Someone in a space where you thought they didn't belong? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Let's start a conversation about seeing each other, really seeing each other for who we are. And remember, dignity isn't granted. It's recognized.